So, hello and welcome, my dear friends. This is your friend, philosopher, and guide, your mentor, Prabhat Sharma, with you once again with a triumph of surgery, lesson 1 from a supplementary reader of class 10 English, Footprints Without Feet. So, now we come to page number 3, lesson 1, a triumph of surgery. Now we will see, we will read and we will find out, as it has been mentioned on page number 3 also. Is the narrator as rich as Tricky's mistress? Secondly, how does he treat the dog? Third, why is he tempted to keep Tricky on as a permanent guest? Fourth question, the last one, which comes to our mind, why does Mrs. Pumphrey think the dog's recovery is a triumph of surgery? So we shall begin the reading now. Dear guys, please pay attention. Page number 3, a triumph of surgery, supplementary reader, footprints without feet. So please do open your books, NCERT books. Supplementary readers, footprints without feet. Shall we begin? Hope everybody is ready with that. So I shall start reading. At the surgery, the household dogs surged round me. Tricky looked down at the noisy pack with dull eyes and, when put down, lay motionless on the carpet. The other dogs, after sniffing round him for a few seconds, decided he was an uninteresting object and ignored him. I made up a bed for him in a warm, loose box next to the one where the other dogs slept. For 2 days, I kept an eye on him, giving him no food but plenty of water. At the end of the second day, he started to show some interest in his surroundings, and on the third, he began to whimper when he heard the dogs in the yard. When I opened the door, Tricky trotted out and was immediately engulfed by Joe, the greyhound, and his friends. After rolling him over and thoroughly inspecting him, the dogs moved off down the garden. Tricky followed them, rolling slightly with his surplus fat. Later that day, I was present at feeding time. I watched while Tristan slopped the food into the bowls. There was the usual headlong rush, followed by the sounds of high-speed eating. Every dog knew that if he fell behind the others, he was liable to have some competition for the last part of his meal. So this is page number 3, and that's over. We move on to the page number 4 of the story. Let us see what the story goes on. When they had finished, Tricky took a walk around the shining boughs, looking casually inside one or two of them. Next day, An extra bowl was put out for him, and I was pleased to see him jostling his way towards it. From then on, his progress was rapid. He had no medicinal treatment of any kind, but all day he ran about with the dogs, joining in their friendly scrimmages. He discovered the joys of being bowled over, tramped on, and squashed every few minutes. He became an accepted member of the gang, an unlikely, silky object among the shaggy crew, fighting like a tiger for his share at mealtimes and hunting rats in the old hen house at night. He had never had such a time in his life. All the while, Mrs. Pumphrey hovered anxiously in the background, ringing a dozen times a day for the latest bulletins. I dodged the questions about whether his cushions were being turned regularly or his correct coat worn according to the weather. But I was able to tell her that the little fellow was out of danger and convalescing rapidly. The word convalescing seemed to do something to Mrs. Pumphrey. She started to bring round fresh eggs, 2 dozen at a time, to build up Tricky's strength. For a happy period, my partners and I had 2 eggs each for breakfast. But when the bottles of wine began to arrive, the real possibilities of the situation began to dawn on the household. It was to enrich Tricky's blood. Lunch became a ceremonial occasion with 2 glasses of wine before and several during the meal. And page number chart is over. We come to page number 5. So that's the beginning of page number 5 now. Guys are ready, I hope. We begin the reading now. We could hardly believe it when the brandy came to put a final edge on Tricky's constitution. For a few nights, the fine spirit was rolled around, inhaled, and reverently drunk. There were days of deep content, starting well with the extra egg in the morning, improved and sustained the midday wine, and finishing luxuriously round the fire with the brandy. It was a temptation to keep Tricky on as a permanent guest. But I knew Mrs. Pumphrey was suffering, and after a fortnight felt compelled to phone and tell her that the little dog had recovered and was awaiting collection. Within minutes, about 30 feet of gleaming black metal drew up outside the surgery. The chauffeur opened the door and I could just make out the figure of Mrs. Pumphrey, almost lost in the interior. Her hands were tightly clasped in front of her. Her lips trembled. Oh, Mr. Harriet, do tell me the truth. Is he really bitter? Yes, he's fine. There's no need for you to get out of the car. I'll go and fetch him. I walked toward I walked through the house into the garden. A mass of dogs was hurtling round and round the lawn, and in the midst, ear flapping, tail waving, was the golden figure of Tricky. In 2 weeks, he had been transformed into a little, hard muscled animal. He was keeping up well with the pack, stretching out in great bounds, his chest almost brushing the ground. I carried him back along the passage to the front of the house. The chauffeur was still holding the car door open, and when Tricky saw Mistress, he took off from my arms and in a tremendous leap and sailed into Mrs. Pumphrey's lap. She gave a startled "Oh!" and then had to defend herself as he swarmed over her, licking her face and barking. During the excitement, I helped the chauffeur to bring out the beds, toys, cushion, coats, and bowls, none of which had been used. As the car moved away, Mrs. Pumphrey leaned out the window. Tears shone in her eyes. Her lips trembled. "Oh, Mr. Harriet," she cried, "how can I ever thank you? This is a triumph of surgery." Written by James Harriet.